Welcome. And today I have a friend that I haven't seen in 40-some years.
46.
46 years. His name is Josef Ferri, and he has written 2 books.
And I'm working on a third.
Working on a third. So let's just pop right into this, shall we? Tell me a little bit about what inspired the first book.
It was a story that I started writing, as I told you earlier, I started writing spontaneously on a trip and a break from an advertising job. And I just felt this energy inside of me, and I said to my wife, I have to write, because I have all these stories. I know I have a pretty detailed memory, and I started to write a book about the Lower West Side of Buffalo.
So when you write, you tend to write about your experiences. You don't make stuff up out of the blue.
The new one is. The one I'm working on now is complete fiction.
Okay.
Based on a real incident but the whole story is going to be fabricated around one real incident. So, no, I've lived a lot of different areas, I went to 8 schools by the time I got out of high school. So I lived in a lot of different neighborhoods. I lived with an Italian neighborhood. I lived in a Jewish neighborhood. I went to 3 high schools with kids from all over. And it gave me a lot of interaction with a lot of different cultures. Because sometimes people live in one area and they have that one culture that dominates. I mean, my family affects me, right? However, I got to meet a lot of great people, and I say in that first book that my mother...
That's, Trying to Catch the Wind.
Right. The title comes from the song by Donovan Leitch, Catch the Wind.
Okay.
And he personally invited me to London and gave me permission to use the lyrics in this book. Mm-hmm. But my mother...
Does the book and the song sort of come together in any way?
There we go. That book is basically about the great love of my life when I was just starting out as a young man. And on our first date, we drove out to Point Breeze on my first motorcycle. We watched the sunset. We talked about literature, poetry, music, civil rights, and just connected. And we watched the sunset, beautiful sunset, by the water. Always by the water is amazing. And I had mentioned to her this song I kept hearing on the radio. At the time, I was a high school dropout. And I was working outdoors doing construction, and I could listen to my transistor radio. So I kept hearing this song by Donovan, and I asked her if she had heard it. She had not. So I literally took out my transistor radio that I had with the gear I brought to the beach, clicked on KB, the song came on. Instantly, it became our song, connected to us. And do you know the song at all?
All I know is the chorus, but I'm wondering, I was just thinking that, like, what is the song about that he's singing? 3
stanzas. It's about a great love. In the chilly hours and minutes of uncertainty, I want to be in the warm hold of your loving mind. To feel you all around me would be the greatest thing. 'Twould make me sing. But I may as well try and catch the wind.
Oh, it'll never happen.
It's a song about loss. It's a song about great love, but loss. It's really about a relationship, but it's going to fall apart. Because something happens, and he says, but I may as well try and catch the wind. It's this great love. Well, we transferred our own interpretation. For us, it was a song that brought us together.
Uh-huh.
But when I wrote the book, I never questioned it. But as I wrote the book, there's 2 things. There's that song. The subtitle of the book is called Memoir of a Love That Was More Than Love. Does that sound familiar?
No. Is that from
Edgar Allan Poe, Annabel Lee.
Oh.
She was a child and I was a child in this kingdom by the sea,
mm-hmm.
but we loved with a love that was more than love. Mm-hmm. I am my Annabel Lee. Mm-hmm. That's part of one of the stanzas. And she was my Annabel Lee, this person in the book. So I wasn't writing about that when I had this eruption of creativity and started writing. I was writing about the Lower West Side and street games and all the humorous people that I knew, and all of a sudden, my mind flipped onto that relationship, and that was it. That other story that may get written someday got pushed aside, and for 2 years, I played with the story, which became that book. 2 years later, I said I had enough of advertising. Effective immediately, I resigned, and I left my job after 20 years. It was a shock to them because I was an innovator. I had come up with all kinds of marketing stuff, but I'd had enough. I needed to fulfill this destiny to be an author of novels, and I left. And it took me a while. Donovan, here's the Mallorca connection. I was visiting my friends in Mallorca. This was after Mrs. Graves had died. I visit every year, almost every year. I've been there like 17 times. And I was talking to Tomas Graves, the youngest son of his second wife, Beryl. And it just like this. And I said, oh, geez, I've been trying to get a hold of Donovan. I tried his fan club. And he goes, oh, I'm doing some design work on his villa here in Mallorca. And he says, send me an outline, I'll give it to Donovan. So I talked about fate, the way I met this woman in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Fate, there's a lot of things, a real crazy stuff that happened. But here, fate in talking to someone in Europe that was connected to the person I was trying to reach. So I said that, I sent that to
It sounds like fate plays a big role in your life.
It really does. So Donovan personally emailed me, and he said, invisible lines head towards each and connect. Some people call it coincidence. They're certainly not. Contact me. I contacted him. He invited me to meet him. I went to London to see him perform Sunshine Superman at the Royal Albert.
What year was this?
2011.
Mm.
And he had Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin with him, Sean Phillips and the London Symphony Orchestra. Fate. I get there. I'm in the loge. Loges are like a dozen seats separated by a small railing, a necklace around the ring, and then, of course, the stage. Woman comes down from behind, and she was there with her husband. She introduced herself. She had been a vocal backup singer with the Kinks.
Mm.
So she says to me, you see these guys right next to us, the next loge?
Yeah.
No, who are they? Group Oasis had been there to watch Donovan. There were people from all over the world. I met people from Italy, from the United States that flew all over to see that performance. He signed 2 copies of the album, one for me and one for the woman in the story, and gave me permission to use lyrics from 3 songs. So, I mean, it just, there's so many things, and while I'm writing that book, so many other things kept happening, and then, of course, reconnecting with Woodstock after 40 years. I'm friends with Juma Sultan, who played with Hendrix. I'm John Sebastian from The Love and Spoonful. Michael Lang and I did a book signing last summer. I was signing Trying to Catch the Wind, and he had his book. So I've gotten to meet a lot of people, and it just, last week I met, I can't even believe this, last week I met Gary Furstenberg, who was a photographer with Bruce Springsteen and all these other people. Well, he's in a radio station in New York. He wants me to contact him because he wants to do an interview. I swear to God, it's like, you know, once they realize you really are passionate about something, it seems to make people connect, you know. And I tell them all the time, the fountain of youth is curiosity and passion. If you keep those things and you keep looking and searching and doing, you can defy some of, some of fate.
Right. Yeah, in other words, you won't grow old mentally.
No. I've been having lunch with a friend of mine the last 3 weeks. She's in the first book. She's a woman that took a ride on my first motorcycle one night. Just a simple thing, and we reconnected about 4 years ago. And she's been coming back to, her father lives in Cheektowaga. He lives at home alone, self-sufficient, hard of hearing, little stiff walking, but totally self-sufficient. On October 4th, he's going to be 106. He reads the paper every day. He could have this conversation. Got to talk loud. But the guy's amazing. 106, and he still can tell you stories and sometimes people that get older, they can't remember, present day, but they could tell you memories from way, way back. This guy reads the newspaper, and he could discuss things in a relatively intelligent way. My God, how great is that? I told Anita, I said, if we had ever gotten together, because my grandmother and my family, we've got centurions in there. I said, our kids would have lived to been 150. But it's amazing. And, there's never, the key, Richard, is this. I have a lot of people my age, and they're totally fixated on what they did in the past. They talk about the good old days. I do. I talk about the good old days. But a lot of things that I did back then have connected me and made present-day friendships, like with Juma Sultan, John Sebastian, Barry Levine, a still photographer from Woodstock, Elliot Landy, another one. I have made friendships that are present and they're going into the future. So the past, the present, and the future are still connected for me. I look at the past, I live in the present, and I look forward to the future. And it's just that energy of living, I think, is the fountain youth. That's my humble theory. Crazy.
Do you have a woman currently in your life? Because it seems to be a high priority for you.
Well, I've had a lot of women in my life. I was married, divorced. I was married to a woman who was bipolar, and she drank. I didn't know. The drinking part was kind of concealed. I didn't know anything about bipolarism.
Do you think the bipolar was connected to the alcohol intake?
Yeah, her family, there was a lot. I didn't know her family. She was from Erie. But we're still friends. We still do things almost every weekend. We still are friends. I'm still her main supporter, whenever she needs. But she no longer drinks. She's in AA. She's been there religiously. She doesn't smoke anymore. She's really cleaned up her life, but we're close, but not intimate. And at this point, I have a lot of friends, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I have so many activities I'm doing. I don't feel a need to, some men need a woman to take care of their house and whatever. I never needed that, so I'm basically, I have a lot of friends. I'm still flirtatious, but I have no interest in going through another deep involvement. Like with my friend Anita, she left today for South Carolina. She just moved from LA. She was involved with the movie industry. So she's kind of mostly retired. She does stuff remotely now from wherever she is, and she lives in Hilton Head, where I know she would like to take it to the next level. Ain't happening. I mean, I just need to...
She's dropped hints.
Well, I could tell. Yeah. We went to Zoar Valley a week ago Friday. I took her down to Zoar Valley. She had been there like 40 years because she hasn't been in the area. And it was just beautiful. One of the great memories of my lost first love was when we reconnected years later. I went on a picnic with her to Zoar Valley. This was 1971. Indian summer. Have you ever been down there?
No.
Oh.
I always hear on the news people dying there.
Oh, no.
Falling.
That's because they walk on the cliffs and it's shale and, knock, knock. Shale does.
So there's a way to go there and be perfectly safe.
Oh, God, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, God, yeah. No, it's not a suicide place. It's not the San Francisco Bridge where you jump off. No, it's beautiful. We used to camp there in 1970, and then it got overrun by idiots, and they stopped it. But we used to go camping there. I took Marilyn there, and there's a scene in this book that was so sublime. We were having a picnic. She had her son from her divorce, her marriage that she had. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff in it. But we were on a blanket. Indian summer. The trees were all brilliant colors. The sunshine hits them, and they're phosphorescent. The Cattaraugus Creek sparkling with sunshine. Beautiful, warm, perfect autumn day. And while we're sitting on the blanket, 3 untethered horses came sauntering by. It was like the Garden of Eden. And I looked at her, and I could see her connection to her son and the beauty that she had. I still have one photograph of her from that time. She was blowing a dandelion. or no, a milk pod. She was blowing the seeds, and I had a picture of her. But it turned out it was the last time we would ever be together. All kinds of crazy stuff happened, and after that, our paths went away, and I found out 2 years later that she sold her house in Amherst and moved to Zoar Valley. She had never been there before. She was so impressed with it. She bought a place in East Otto. There's a lot
So she can walk to Zoar Valley now from her place,
Well,
right?
it is in Zoar Valley.
Oh, you can buy a place in Zoar Valley.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
It's mostly farmland, and you could go down there and not see hardly any cars, but you'll see hawks and eagles and it's just in the Cattaraugus Creek. There's so many beautiful spots, bridges over the creek, sparkling water, and it's way down deep. You get off the 219 at Springville,
Yeah.
you take a right, then a quick left, and then you drive down that road, Zoar Road, and then it just drops down. And you go wandering. I've done it. I love doing it on my motorcycle. But it's just such a special place, and that, I didn't know it in my life that would be our last time together. What do
you mean, she's deceased?
No,
Oh.
no, things happen, crazy
Oh.
things. I mean, this book is about so many. I mean, in my wallet, I have a chip of the floor she was standing on the night I met her in 1965. May 28th, 1965, not that I remember. I went back to that place in 2009. It had a
Do you
fire.
ever write to her on that date?
No, I go back to, you know what I do? On June 4th, almost every year, I try to, on June 4th, I go back to Point Breeze, where we had our first date. And I walk down the beach. There used to be a cove, and what they did was they opened it up.
Uh-huh. This will keep it from pulling.
Okay. So they opened up, the beach had a cove, and what they did was they landscaped it so the cove has been absorbed into the straight beach. But I know where that spot was where we were because there were trailers behind it. There's a trailer camp. So I could go back to the spot and I'll sit there and read my chapter. Because after this amazing, incredible first date, I had to put the fire, I had to get her home by 11 because we both were 17. And not giving you such a Reader's Digest version, but I put the fire out, we walked across the beach, we were holding hands. We knew we had found our soulmates. We got to my motorcycle, started back to Buffalo, down Old Lakeshore Road. We got to Bennett Road and just went up Bennett Road just because we were aimed in that direction. And she had her arms around me. And in my mind, I was trying to sort out the reality of it. It was so beautiful. It was so perfect. And she was so perfect in my eyes. I was thinking, was this a fantasy? Did I just dream this? But she had her arms around me, and she was holding me, and her head was resting behind my right shoulder, and her face, she was facing that way. Well, we were heading up the beach. I was euphoric. And all of a sudden, a white Mustang came barreling out of a dirt driveway of a bar, came right at us head on. I moved my motorcycle out of the way onto a narrow shoulder. The car zoomed past my knee. I couldn't see any space between that car's and my knee. Next thing I know, the motorcycle was up in the air. She had gotten hit on her left knee. Her leg broke as she was being pushed off. Her hands pulled me back. The motorcycle went up to about an 80-degree angle before she released. If she hung on, it would have come right over the top of us. There was nowhere to go. We could go on the narrow shoulder, but beyond that was a ravine and trees. Couldn't go into that. And the irony of this whole thing was, if we were in a car, head-on crash, we probably wouldn't have survived. This guy was flooring this white Mustang. That was one of the crazy things of fate. We were on a motorcycle. How many times have you heard that? I lived because I was on a motorcycle, not in a car. It's like a crazy.
It's usually the opposite.
Exactly. But because we were on a smaller vehicle, and because I reacted quick enough, because if 1 foot difference, and he would have come over the top of us. So I met her mother in the emergency room at OLV, and her mother's first words were, "Who was driving the motorcycle?" I was. "It's your fault." No details.
She didn't even want to know what happened.
I explained to her, I says, the drunk driver, if we were in a car, it would have been a head-on crash, and we would have probably been dead. We are better off. We're better off than if we had been in a car. And I was very rational. I always, luckily, am rational when in crisis. I don't lose my head. I usually make a good choice. Like moving the motorcycle to the right. If I tried to go to the left, we probably would have been totally killed. And I knew not to go off the ravine. I got it over as fast as I could. So that's what I was talking about, fate. That is just, and she knew and I knew. And really, this is not a typical teenage thing. And we were not typical. We were 17, but way more mature. I came from a broken family. She came from a family. The father had been previously married. His children had grown. His wife died. He remarries and had 4 more children. He was 72 when she was 17. He was an old Irish railroad engineer, born in 1893, graduated from high school before World War I. He thought of women as housekeepers and bearer of children. He was a man of the past. Marilyn was a woman of the present and future. So they had endless conflicts. So her turmoil was different than my turmoil. But when we met, we became each other's oasis. So that's the genesis, the basis of this story. And, I sent her a manuscript of it. She's married and lives in Syracuse. And I told her I didn't want to break up her, but I needed to let her know this was being written. And I just told her, I said, I told her a little bit about, circumstance. And then I just simply at the end of this very long letter, I sent her a long letter before I sent the manuscript because I didn't want her to read the book without understanding why I wrote it.
You wanted to give it some context.
Exactly. And why? Because a friend of mine had contacted her, a woman from Buffalo Advertising. And she told her, Joe's writing a book about your relationship. And she says, why now? Why after all these years? That was a great question. I have lived so many different things in my life that was a great question. And I started the letter saying, as we get older and we start losing family members and friends, we look back at our lives and try to evaluate the highs and lows. We ask ourselves if we're introspective. What dreams did I have and did I attain them? What things did I attain that I didn't dream of? The highs and lows. And I told her, I said, I've had a fantastic life. I have lived every bit of the life that young guy in the book talked about. And it's even gotten more exciting since I left advertising because I'm doing everything. But I told her in the end, I said, my greatest regret was that relationship not working out. That's probably why I didn't get married until I was in my 40s, because nobody could live up to the memory I had of her. I said, I'm not trying to break up your marriage. I hope your life is great. But I just want you to know we should be proud of 2 things, or there are 2 things I want you to remember. We should be proud that we created a story that lived beyond its time. And then this next part was really, I had to say it right, because you didn't want this woman to leave her husband and come running to Buffalo from Syracuse, because I don't know how she developed. I don't know if she was that woman and she stayed that,
Mm-hmm. She could have evolved.
Yeah, devolved, right.
Devolved.
Yeah, so I said, the second thing, the most important thing I want you to know is I will never stop loving that young woman in my life. Because that separates it then. Right. If she continued to be that woman, then I could still, but you know what? I did not want to lure her away from,
her marriage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she has another life. But it affected me profoundly, and, but I reached a low point in that book, but I said, after that relationship broke up, I wrote a little bit about what I did, and I say in that book, I could write a book about 1969. Everybody said, you got to write it. So, Tripping Across 1969. Which is
also based on your life.
It is absolutely, everything in it is what I lived. I just changed my name, my character name. because I wanted culpable deniability because there's drugs in there.
Sure.
But it's not an endorsement of drugs. It's you have to talk about drugs in the 60s. I mean, you know, and the anti-war stuff. If you weren't in that conversation, you were living in a shell, you know. And I was part of the anti-war movement. I was part of the takeover at UB. I was involved in so many things. And, you know, and my life kind of changed when I left the university for a while. When I went back, again, I just met more people and, you know, working with original manuscripts. I mean, James Joyce's stuff, handling that stuff, you know, just amazing. And I met poets and writers, Michael Ondaatje, Margaret Atwood. I spent time with Michael McClure and his wife Joanna. He was part of the Beat generation. I have a couple pictures that I told you I met Sean Lennon, right?
Yes.
I have photo sculptures.
Yeah, you showed him, your photo sculptures.
Right, and one of them is on the piano at the Dakota, and I've got a thank you note. I have a music room at home with memorabilia, signed things by different people, and a lot of John Lennon stuff, including Imagine with the Mojo Man and signed by him. And, stuff by Yoko Ono, and you know, it's just he was such a great voice, and he had a real conscience, and that era. I lament what's happened to music with electronic stuff, and I mean, I just saw Jeff Beck 2 nights ago. Unbelievable. The guy.
He's still proficient.
He's 74 and he plays like he's 24. His guitar work was just staggering, staggering. And I love to see that because, you know, John Sebastian, for instance. John Sebastian plays great guitar, but he doesn't have his voice like he had it. Dylan should be retired. Dylan's voice is, you can't even understand him. He still can play it. He sits at a keyboard. He's a shell of the person he was. I saw him 2 times in this decade, and I said, enough, that's it. I can't do it anymore. I mean, you're singing Like a Rolling Stone is one of my theme songs that I lived with in that first book, the summer of '65. That song was out, and I felt like that. I was kind of, I hate to say it, Mark David Chapman had Catcher in the Rye. I had Like a Rolling Stone, but I had no interest in murdering anybody. You know, I had a completely different mindset. But Dylan, I worshiped Dylan up until probably John Wesley Harding. And then afterwards, his output went in complete. Nashville Skyline, for instance. There's a couple love songs on there, Lay Lady Lay. I had a whole group of people waiting at my apartment in Allentown. And when the song came out, I raced to the Cabbages store at the Boulevard Mall to get that album, and I had everybody waiting at my apartment, and we played it, you know, and he had that voice that he tried to reinvent it.
Yeah, he tried to go deeper and more melodious.
And it was like, what the hell was this? You know, it was, we thought, you know, it was kind of a joke, actually, because we didn't. But then, you know, you got used to the sound, and there's some good songs on there. But nothing like Blonde on Blonde, or for me, the anti-war stuff. Masters of War, Blowing in the Wind, the civil rights stuff, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, It's All Right, Mom, Only Bleeding, which was a great song about questioning the values. That's part of what that person in the review that did of this second book mentioned about some of the stuff. There's a lot of stuff. I could have added more stuff in the book, and I just said, you know, this is it. This is going to be it. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So the new book is totally different because it's fiction, and it's a lot of dialogue, and some of it is based on real conversations I had. But you know, it's fun. It's a different kind of book because there's a lot more conversation than descriptive. This second book is a lot of description.
What's the name of the book you're writing now? You didn't give it a name.
Haven't figured it out yet. It's about a terrorist in 1969 a guy that actually tried to recruit me to do a heinous, murderous act to start the revolution that we all talked about.
So the current book is about 1969.
Strictly about, well, 95% is 1969. In the opening of the new book,